Mr. Daniel Mahoney is a founding and managing partner of Mahoney Liotta Law Firm based in Ulaanbaatar. Dan is a lawyer by training and has almost 20-year experience of providing legal and business advisory to international and national companies in successfully doing business in Mongolia. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
In one of your company profiles, it's stated that many clients may not fully understand the complexities and difficulties unique to the development of Mongolia. Please specify some of these complexities and difficulties you talked about in your statement.
I guess mainly as lawyers, we're talking about the development of the legal system in Mongolia. And we opened our firm in 1997. So that was just a few years after the collapse of communism and establishment of market economy and market-based laws in Mongolia.
Right.
So at the time, all these laws were new, and the infrastructure, the regulators, and the courts and everything was new. So that's, I think, probably one very unique thing about Mongolia for foreign investors looking in Mongolia.
Right, but since your establishment, it's been it's actually exactly been 20 years. Which do you see in terms of the development? What do you see? Have you seen much progress, or do you think there are still a lot of areas that need to be improved?
Well, there's areas that need to be improved, but there has also been a lot of progress, of course. In 1997, when we first came, there's a property registration office was set up to register ownership of apartments, but that was about it. And now they've just established a new system to register other pledges of other types of collateral. The regulators have gained a lot of experience, the securities regulators, the FRC, the banking regulators. Everybody in 20 years of work have gained a lot of experience, as have our competitor law firms.
Right. Could you name some specific areas which still need to be improved, you think?
I think it's, I would say probably the tax. Okay. Tax is a difficult area where it's still investors, and not only investors, but Mongolian business people have a difficult time due to lack of consistency and lack of detailed rules and ad hoc administration by different tax offices, different tax officers would apply law in a different way. Right. And it's very difficult for business owners, and I want investors, business owners, Mongolian as well as foreign, to really understand what they're supposed to do and to follow the rules.
I see. Yeah, in one of our previous interviews, we talked to a tax expert, Ms. Anchin Surang, and she also said, one of the difficulties of doing business in Mongolia might be the number of these state organizations that may need more clarity in terms of their roles and better arrangement even among themselves. So that's basically what you're talking about with regard to tax?
Yeah, with regard to tax and other organizations, as well as training, I think, of staff. And at election time, there's a lot of turnover in departments. I see. And we've talked for years about having a more formal civil service in Mongolia, where people their jobs aren't changed because of change of elections, and develop some expertise in the area within the different departments and authorities. Because now sometimes they'll change and people aren't trained, and so it's not always their fault if they actually are trying to apply these laws and regulations, but they haven't been trained, and so there is a difficulty many times faced. Yeah.
Of course, and having maybe improperly or inadequately trained civil servants at these public organizations, of course, would be quite time-consuming and troublesome for the businesses, as I understand. Is it correct? Is that where the business is having most difficulties with regard to the inconsistent civil servants?
Yes, yeah. I think it's, now speaking, for example, foreign investors, we do a lot of representing foreign investors investing in Mongolia. So a lot of the risks in Mongolia can be addressed through contracts and quite frankly, offshore arbitration or providing in agreements with the partners to address issues. But one thing you can't avoid is dealing with the tax authority. And if you have a dispute with the tax authority, it goes to Mongolian court. And so this is probably the main, so you can have a successful business, you can make profits, but sometimes the more profits you make, then the more interest the tax people have in you. And you can't do business in Mongolia without dealing with the tax authorities.
Exactly. So based on my previous experience, what I understood was, of course, we have the Mongolian law on one hand, but if Mongolia is a party to international agreements that are related to that specific area of law, then the international agreements or international the legislation would prevail the national laws. That's how I understood. But you're saying that it does not apply to tax-related laws.
Yeah, well, sure. There's international agreements on tax as well as many different areas. And yes, under Mongolian law is clear, and actually the regulators are pretty faithful in applying it in the courts. That international agreement will prevail. But of course, there's no international agreement about income tax of a company operating in Mongolia. That's solely a Mongolian law issue. Exactly. So you're solely subject to Mongolian law as a business operating in Mongolia.
I see. Then what would be your top, let's say, 3-4 advice to your clients or anyone who is interested in doing business in Mongolia in tackling or sort of, how would I say, minimizing the risks, such risks you mentioned? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the advice is similar to other countries, but the first one is to have a good Mongolian partner, because it's really difficult as a foreign investor. It depends on the size of the project also. I mean, for somebody like Rio Tinto, who's a huge multinational, it's a little bit different than a small investor from the United States or from Australia. For the smaller projects, medium-sized projects, it's really essential, I think, to have a reliable Mongolian partner, and it's difficult to find a good partner.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing.
But it's possible. They just have to. I guess the first advice is to be careful and investigate and do your due diligence on your partner, but find a good partner. Right. And there are good partners. Right.
And what else would be your advice? Find a good partner, also.
I mean, I think the other, not to go back to tax, but the financials is to monitor closely the business here in Mongolia and to keep track, on a constant basis of what's going on. Another problem you see a lot of is to have a good understanding of what you're doing, so language is a problem, of course, for a foreign investor. Now we're talking about, so they need to have essential documents that they're asked to sign or submit, file, translated, or they need to have an understanding. They either word-for-word translation or explained very clearly to them by their staff or by their advisors or something. So I think this is very important. We've seen as lawyers, you see many problems over the years where clients come in and say, well, that's not what I understood we were doing at the time, and now there's a problem.
Yeah. I keep hearing, especially because, as you said, Mongolian market economy has been developing just over 20 years for now. So there are still a lot of areas that need to be improved in terms of meeting the internationally accepted standards. So some of the economic sectors are quite new to Mongolia, especially the services or the special, the professional services. That's why a lot of the legal language that are used in English have not been introduced in Mongolian language, maybe until now or until quite recently. How do you tackle with that? I mean, how do you go around that as a law firm?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have, obviously I'm American, or not obviously I'm a foreigner, but I'm an American, so I speak English. But since we were founded, we always had Mongolian partners and a lot of Mongolian lawyers working for us. And so what we try to do is to understand within the firm the legal concept that we're talking about, and then to get it translated into Mongolian either as a word or as a concept. And then, so if there's a defined term or an accepted international standard term, we as offshore lawyers or foreign lawyers, if we understood the term, we would try and explain it. We would discuss, and then our Mongolian lawyers would help us put it in terms that would be understandable in Mongolian.
Right. You said when you set up your own company, you also partnered Mongolians. Yes. What were your main, the criteria or kind of requirements you sought in your own partners, local partners?
Well, actually, I'd met our original partner in Washington, D.C. We worked together in a law firm in Washington.
I see.
So I knew him, knew him before he came,
Uh-huh.
and actually he invited me to Mongolia. That's how I arrived here.
But maybe speaking based on your clients or other expats doing business in Mongolia, the kind of quality they seek in their local partners. What did you find the most common?
Well, yeah, that is in the early years. Most common is that they met somebody, that the foreign investor met their Mongolian partner somewhere, often in Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore.
So mostly through personal connections.
Through personal connections. For the smaller projects. Of course, the larger projects, it's a little bit different.
They would more look at the professional background, etc.
Yeah, they would, organizations like BCM or check with, many times people come, potential clients, and ask us. They ask us about, this is our potential partners, do you have any comments? And so ask around and get references and check with people that you trust. And because Mongolia is very small.
Exactly.
And everybody knows everybody else.
True.
Even if not personally or directly, they know of them, or or they know somebody who knows of them. So it's not that hard.
Right, exactly. Okay. When I was looking at your website, the company website, I noticed that you have very wide range of services you're offering through your firm. Of course, I think the number of years you've been in the country justifies that long list of services that range from registration and regulatory affairs to export, customs and trade, etc. But I wanted to point out the government relations, which actually you pointed out earlier in the discussion as well, in terms of the inconsistent, maybe the civil service, etc. Could you share some of the advice that you provide to your clients under the government relations section, because some of the viewers of our video, the interview, would be ones I don't think who would have who would necessarily have the capacity to have a law firm like yourself as their the professional helper. So could you share some of the insights that could fall under this category?
Mainly, I guess, in our website, what that means is that we assist our clients who are primarily in negotiating contracts where the government's a party. Either the government is a contract party, for example, in some of the larger mining projects where the government's actually a shareholder, or where the government is a regulator. So we would be discussing and meeting with the regulators on behalf of the client. So this is what we mean by government relations. We also help, just generally the business community in lobbying for new laws. When new laws are published, or hopefully they're published in draft form first, and we have a chance to review the draft and then to make some suggestions. And so that's probably what we would cover by government relations.
How has the government been, how responsive has the government been in terms of accepting, the kind of suggestions from business community?
It changes from government to government.
I see.
Originally, when it first came in, I think generally, to be honest, in the late 90s, government was very open to suggestions and discussions with foreign investors or with at the time, there were few foreigners actually living full time. So myself and I had another American partner, and we had a lot of discussions with the parliament members and government regulators about questions they had.
I see.
And then as the economy grew and particularly the commodity prices went up, then the government seemed less interested in getting advice because there was so much. I think they took the view that there was so much value in Mongolia that the investors, that they had the upper hand basically, and that investors they didn't need to cater to investors. Investors needed to cater to them if they wanted to get a gold mine or a copper mine or whatever. And of course, in the last few years, that has kind of backfired.
Exactly.
And now the current government is very open.
I see. So you see some promising results. You're expecting some promising results from the current government.
Yes.
Could you name some of the the positive actions that the current government has taken that has given you this kind of positive outlook?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think just being open to discussions. And I mean, in all the time over the years, of course, all the government leaders will come to they will always go to investor conferences and say, yes, we'll listen to you. If you have any problems, come speak to us. But then when you actually try to go and speak to them, sometimes it's not so easy. But this government has been open and aggressive in soliciting comments. And the Prime Minister, the Speaker, other ministers have come regularly to monthly investor meetings and have presented their platform. They listened to issues and they've reacted, and so far positively. There's a lot of changes or a lot of proposed laws, of course, under consideration. We'll see what happens, including mining law, labor law, and some other issues. And we, together with some others in the business community, are providing comments on those laws. We'll see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah, fingers crossed. I see. On your client portfolio, what I understood, I mean, when I was also speaking to some of the not similar but professional services firms like the investment banking or the tax, they were sort of sharing insights in terms of their client portfolio, because they were saying that how the client portfolio looks like at the moment can be reflecting of the current economic sector, which sector is doing well, which sector is attracting more investors, which sector has more trends, etc., is more trendy, etc. So just to understand, this kind of big picture, could you share some of the insights from your client portfolio? Any dominant country in the portfolio or any dominant sector you see?
Mining has always been, in 20 years, was historically the dominant sector, and it was what was bringing in all the investment into Mongolia. And then when that cash went into the economy, it went into the real estate and into banking. So those were the key sectors. We've represented clients from all countries. Probably if you name a country, we've worked with them. In the early years, there was a lot of Canadian investment into mining, into exploration. Later, it became more Australian, because that's where the money was raised, on the stock exchange in Australia, say 5-6 years ago. Recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, unfortunately, there's been minimal and little investment in the exploration side of mining. So a lot of that business has dried up. And the last few years, it's been actually a lot of infrastructure work on new power projects and renewable power projects. That's been the focus, probably, at least for our business, in the last 2 to 3 years.
In terms of the mining, is it mostly gold and copper, or any other, specific type of mining sector that Mongolians are not very familiar with, but the foreigners are looking to explore in Mongolia?
Well, generally, I think mining companies and investors are interested in anything, but of course, coal was really hot for a while, and now the market's fallen off the last 3 or 4 years. Coal had in the early years, there was very little interest in coal, and then there was a 3 or 4 year period when coal prices went way up, and there was a lot of investment and activity in the coal sector. But I think throughout gold is always interest, and I think always will be. Copper is the same. I think the long-term prospects for copper. Uranium has always been here, and there's always been uranium projects, but there's always national security issues, and because of the nature of uranium. But there's still a lot of interest in uranium. Iron ore, for a while, there was some interest. It's a little bit, I guess, more difficult commodity because of the bulk to transport out of the country. So, but it's copper and gold are probably still today, and probably for the future.
Right. Besides these kind of, what Mongolian government likes to call as strategic sectors, like the infrastructure, mining, and maybe even transport, air transport, for example. As an expat, which kind of areas, maybe some niche areas of economy, do you think Mongolia has the potential to develop more? I'm thinking of maybe organic farming or things like that. But just in as a foreigner who's lived in Mongolia for many years, which do you think, which sectors do you think have the more potential in the long run?
Yeah, well, I know, I think you probably know too, the government for a long time has talked about the IT sector because that's, I mean, there's a lot of well-trained, smart, young, mostly, I guess, in technologies, young people, and that's good potential. Because, you know, the Mongolian situation has always been that the domestic market is kind of small.
Yeah.
So,
it's very small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't, it doesn't make economic sense to build a car assembly plant here because the sales is too small and then the distance to other markets where you can sell is too far and too expensive. So there's a lot of types of industries that wouldn't work in Mongolia, but IT would work.
You talked a lot about mining. When we talk about mining, most of the time people think mining is high risk, high return type of business. But earlier you mentioned to me it's not always the case. Could you explain a bit more on that?
Yes, what we were talking about was exploration, which is very high risk but very high return. And this is, I think, maybe somewhat misunderstood in Mongolia, that the exploration phase, which is when you're just acquiring new ground, it was never previously been mined, that there's big risk. You have to go and spend a lot of money drilling, doing investigations, and say out of 10 companies, only 1 out of 10 will find anything, the other 9 will go bankrupt. So these businesses always financed on stock exchanges, in, most in Toronto in Canada and in Australia, which are big mining countries with a lot of experience of financing exploration work. So banks don't lend to these companies because there's a good chance that 9 out of 10 of them will go bankrupt. And there's investors in Toronto or in Canada, in Australia that understand this business very well. And they finance all of this work. And this was in the early years in Mongolia. A lot of the investment into Mongolia was these kinds of companies. And so if you're the 1 out of 10 that finds Oyu Tolgoi, then your investment goes 100 times.
I see.
And so the investor knows if I invest in 10 and 9 go bankrupt, the 10th one will go 100 times. So overall, I'll make my money back. And these investors are it's a relatively small pool of investors, and they know what's going on around the world. So, for example, in 2006, when the windfall profits tax came in, this is when the investment from Canada just dried up. And they started investing in companies working in Colombia and in South America because they know which countries are friendly to investment.
I see.
And they know where, because it's all high risk money, so they know, very knowledgeable, and they know which countries are better and worth their investment. And then, and then Mongolia second, they came along with the strategic mine concept, which is basically, I always say it's like going to a casino, that if you win the jackpot, then the casino owner comes and says, give me 1/3 for free. So why, if I'm going to put real high risk money into my project, would I go to Mongolia where I have to give 1/3 to the government? I'll go to a country where I get to keep my jackpot. And so this is what's really hurt investment at the exploration stage in Mongolia. Now, we also talk other projects like Oyu Tolgoi, where the resource has already been discovered and developed. Once they discover copper deposits, there's continuing. They're still doing it now, drilling and trying to expand. It's going to be bigger. They don't know, how big it is, but what they do know is that it's big enough, and they know that how it sits in the ground and how it's structured, and the engineering to get it out of the ground, and they know they can make a profit by doing that. And they check all of these things, a company like Rio Tinto, and they won't invest until they eliminate, or until they know that they won't invest the big $10 billion to exploit the mine, until they know all of these things. They know that the resource is there, they know how it's structured, they know the engineering. And the other thing we were talking about is the political risk.
Yeah.
They address that issue as well. And before they're going to put 10 billion in, they're going to make sure that they're covered by political risk, mainly that the government won't confiscate their investment, or that the tax regime will stay stable. And this was what was behind the stability agreement. And that's not just for Mongolia, it's for any developing country. They would want these kinds of assurances before they would invest.
Right.
But for them, it's they're still going to make good profit, but it's not like the exploration company that makes 100 times what it invested. It's more like if we invest 10 billion, we'll make a 25% return or something. So it's good, of course, good profit.
I see. Can you elaborate a bit more on the stability agreement you just mentioned? What are the main inclusion over there, and how it's protecting the investor, and how the government is practicing it in Mongolia?
Yeah, well, it's it mainly is fiscal stability, but which is taxes, so the tax rate. Because if you invest in the project, and tax laws, of course, can always be amended. Any law can be amended.
Yeah.
And what the government has done in the stability agreement at the time is to guarantee to Rio that the tax rates in effect and the taxes in effect at the time that the agreement was signed will stay stable.
Right.
There's some other, this is a document's public record. It's all over the internet, of course, and in the stock exchange filings in Canada. It covers other things, labor, licensing, things like this. But it's basically just to say you'll have stable environment going forward, and probably the most important thing is fiscal and tax stability going forward.
Can this stability agreement be done by other investors as well, or is it only for specific projects over, bringing over specific number of investment?
Well, under the new investment law that was adopted a couple of years ago, I forget, 2014 maybe. Now there's two things. Any business can get a tax stability agreement, any tax stability agreement, and any large, I think it's in certain sectors, really large, what you're talking about, really multi-billion-dollar project, you can get an investment agreement, which is similar to the stability agreement that Oyu Tolgoi has, which is broader coverage. But any investor can get just the tax stability. I forget, there is a minimum investment. I forget what the amount is,
okay, sure.
But a relatively small amount.
Right. So it seems like the government has been giving significance to specific sectors like the mining infrastructure, and they've been trying to first attract investors through offering this kind of incentives like the stability agreement. But at the same time, they've been trying to protect such sectors, naming them as strategic sectors. For example, right? So, with the current government, what do you think? They have to work as priority to fix the situation, to keep the right balance in terms of, making Mongolia look like they are being very protective on the one hand, but on the other hand, they've been trying to be very open or very welcoming.
Yeah, well, there's the strategic sectors are mining, media, and finance. But most countries do have national security interests in strategic sectors, so it's not unusual for Mongolia to have that. And I wouldn't say that they're giving advantages or benefits or special treatment to investors. All investors want a stable environment, and the fact of the matter is the United States is more stable than Mongolia. So if you invest in the United States, you don't expect, or you don't necessarily need a stability agreement, because you know that the legal environment will stay relatively stable. Sure, Congress could change tax rates, but and they do from time to time, but nothing like what the risk that they foresee in Mongolia. So that's why they need it in the stability agreement to invest in a country like Mongolia. So for the government going forward, as we talked before, investors just need to see results because of what happened the last 3 or 4 years with all the negative experiences of investors. And so the government now has been going out and been telling everybody that those mistakes are in the past, lessons have been learned. Right. And going forward, we're definitely committed to investment, we're committed to rule of law, we're committed to fairness, and they just have to prove it now over time. We still have, there's huge potential in this country, and there's been unfortunately some missteps over the last 5-6 years, and mainly because of Mongolia was maybe too successful too quickly at the time. I mean, as far as drawing investment in, and things were going maybe too fast.
Since 17% increase in GDP, etc.
And all and just huge inflow of money into the country, and so things were going really maybe too fast for the population, society to manage, to understand. I mean, when it's 17% compounding year on year, and there's so many changes. I mean, in Ulaanbaatar, I mean, as you know, if you lived here, physically, explosion in building, but also I think in the society is really coming from communist era and then slowly into market economy, and then all of a sudden sort of just thrown into totally in in such a rapid rate that it's tough to adjust.
Yeah.
And maybe some mistakes made in adjusting to it.
Yeah, and we really hope to see the current government learning from the mistakes and doing what's right in the future.
Yeah, not only the government, but the whole country and society, and everybody understanding, maybe having better understanding of, for example, it's not going to go up forever, 17%.
Yeah.
It's going to maybe come down sometimes, and should manage it for the long run, not the short run, and more exposure, experience, education, more of just general concepts of a market economy.
Yeah, exactly. I think I should highlight something here as well, because what you said about finding qualified and reliable workforce is one of the top challenges in Mongolia. I think that really should make the general public and the professionals, aspiring professionals, to reflect on themselves and trying to, how would I say, build up more soft skills like trust building, etc. It seems like.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your insightful discussion, and all the best in your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.